Yo, did you ever wonder what data governance is all about? Well, listen up. DATA, letters that we live by. In a world that's digital, we chose the data life. Enterprise-wise, the data flows left and right. We are the ones who keep it all in our sight. Rules, policies, principles, guidelines. Not the most sexy, but better than the stop signs. Working the segue between business and tech. 1 foot in each world, all data in check. Data quality, data quality. No day goes by without this terminology. We know end-to-end how data works best. We set up the rules and the business does the rest. Governance of data, defect terminators. Good data comes first and the rest will follow later. We know what is right, so let's make the data flow. We're role models of excellence. Let's govern it, let's go. Still not clear what data governance means? Here are some analogies to make you understand. If data is the force, then we're the Jedi Council. Using it well, that's one of our main goals. If data was a country in a world full of humans, we'd be in the embassy working on solutions. We're running marathons where the data flows, governing holistically in every column, every row. We're not the police, but we are data Sherpas. With our help, there's no hurdle that you can't pass. We might be nerds, but just the good kind. We can do great things even more than these rhymes. Governance of data, governance of defect terminators. Defect terminators. Good data comes first, and the rest will follow later. We know what is right, so let's make the data flow. Make it flow, yo. We're role models of excellence. Let's go. Let's go. You made it here. This is the third verse. Are you ready for some governance buzzwords? People, process, projects, and tools. Automation starts with business rules. Data models, solution designs. A data catalog helps us to simplify. Master, reference, and metadata. Overviews are good, but governance is greater. System updates and new integrations will design solutions with standing ovations. Governance is cool, you got that right. In the name of data, hands up and high five. Governance of data. Defect terminators. Good data comes first, and the rest will follow later. We know what is right, so let's make the data flow. We're role models of excellence. Let's govern it, let's go. Governance of data, defect terminators. Good data comes first, and the rest will follow later. We know what is right, so let's make the data flow. We're role models of excellence. Let's govern it, let's go.
All right. Really excited to have you here, Tiankai. Let's go.
Hi, good to be here.
Governance of data.
Yes, governance of data indeed.
Actually, when did you record this?
That was roughly more than 2 years ago now. Actually,
right.
it was like one of my first things after I started my data governance journey, like 2 months or 3 months into the job. And one of my goals was to rebrand data governance. That was given to me by my boss, basically, that it's misunderstood and we need to kind of reposition it. And I basically used my musical talents to try to do so, right? And it really helped. I mean, it didn't solve all the problems, but at least it broke the ice for many people. So that was important.
Yeah, I mean, I love the song. I'm just like in
Thank you.
awe about the talent that you have because it's very catchy. It's so true.
Thank you.
Like all the lyrics, so true.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
really amazing.
Yeah.
So thanks for being here. I'm really excited to have you as a guest. I guess it would be great to just start off with a quick introduction of yourself. If you can share a little bit more about how you got into data and how you got to running and leading data governance at Thoughtworks today.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm currently the lead for data strategy and data governance at Thoughtworks Europe. Thoughtworks is a consultancy that focuses on tech and data topics and is also in the data industry known as the data mesh company since Jamako wrote the book, was initially working at Thoughtworks. So we have been kind of just part of that journey from the very beginning. Before that, I was working for 6 years at Adidas, the sportswear and footwear company, right? And I was basically there having various roles. The last one I had was being the senior director of product data governance. So really the data behind the shoes and the t-shirts and along that life cycle, how that can have higher quality and avoid risks. Before that, I was the capability lead for social media and voice of consumer analytics, so more into consumer feedback analytics and text mining. I was also data product owner for various reporting solutions. And before that, I was working at another smaller consultancy called TD Reply, also focusing on marketing analytics. But yeah, all my career, I've basically been part of basically the data community, so to say. I just switched from the analyst side to actually the governance management strategy side, I would say. But I really like it, like because I quit myself with being a data consumer first, and now that I'm actually on the management side, I kind of have still that empathy, right? And I know exactly how it feels to be an analyst to not get the right data or not getting access to the right data. So yeah, that's me.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, you must have also seen so much of the complexity that, as a, I guess, for the end users,
Hmm.
as a data analyst, but also to now you're on the other side of trying to manage the data, make sure that data is governed and given to the right people on the access side. That now you see also the complexity that comes with, which I would love to dive into more. So I guess just
Hmm.
like a high level question to start with, because I wanted to kind of dive into these three topics, right? What is it like to do governance in retail? What is it like to do governance in EU? And what would be the governance would look like with Gen AI?
Hmm.
So maybe we can start with the topic of Gen AI. This is
Hmm.
a topic that everyone is talking about and is the future. So I'm curious how you see and what type of opportunities that you see that data governance implementation can be improved with or improved for using Gen AI in the company.
Yes, I think you're bringing to the right point. I think when it comes to data governance in GenAI, you have two relationships, right? One is data governance for GenAI, or it's GenAI for data governance, right? So I want to kind of address both of these directions. I think for number one, right, data governance for GenAI, we all know that AI, if it's GenAI or not, is all learning from data, right? And that puts all of the newness and the importance onto the learning data sets that AI models are based on. And if that learning data set is of low quality or is having a strong bias, for example, then you're only going to amplify the bad things by doing it in AI too, right? So garbage in, garbage out principle. With AI, you might even scale up the garbage, for example, in many ways. So that becomes a big topic. And to in hindsight then talk about data governance means that data governance is trying to meet all of the requirements of all of the data use cases, right? So defining data quality, for example, based on what the data is being used for has always been the case, but now just a lot of more use cases, AI use cases, are popping up, and they have far higher requirements than in the past for reporting purposes, for example. And that means
You
that
say reporting purposes.
yeah, then for example, just descriptive reporting, right? And this having said, then that means basically that data governance has this whole new pool of requirements that need to be managed, and to now define data quality in a much more stricter and much more complicated sense to really meet those requirements. And in a lot of ways, I usually describe data governance as bringing stakeholders together as well, right? So that means data consumers and data producers, right? Those that produce the data and then it's used at somewhere else. And if you have GenAI consumers and you have data producers that don't know that it's being used for GenAI, bringing them together can help.
Got it. So,
Mhm.
are there anything in particular as kind of like the ABCs or the main essential components of data quality or tracking or reporting that you recommend your clients to have in order to have a good data governance for Gen AI?
Yes, absolutely. I think, I mean, it comes down really to first having a data quality framework. And that might be just like, for example, defining data quality in dimensions, right? Completeness, timeliness, accuracy. Those are like the basic dimensions to have. And you can always write down rules in each of those different dimensions to make it specific to a use case. I think that's the easy way to get started. When it comes to AI, though, it gets more complicated, right? So you might want to also avoid bias, for example, if it's about consumer preferences, for example, right? So how do you actually avoid bias? That's a really big question to have. And that means that actually you have to define fairness as well. And the fairness is translated into data structures and actual rules. And that is not easy, which means basically AI users and experts and data governance people need to work together actually to define that together. But those are the new rules that data quality needs to actually be defined now.
Right. It seems like the data quality, the meaning of data quality, especially for Gen AI, is beyond the technical side of data quality, like freshness and cardinality, things like that. And I guess
Exactly.
in that case, especially around bias of AI, it's not necessarily always the center of excellence teams are aware or can say much about, don't you think? If I'm using the AI for my customer success use case, I,
Yeah,
as a domain stakeholder, probably have the best understanding whether the result of Gen AI is biased or not. So I guess
exactly.
like where does so collaboration totally makes sense. I'm wondering like then is the job of data governance team for Gen AI more or less around providing the frameworks and tooling that the domain stakeholders can use to determine and mitigate potential bias?
Yes, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. I think not even that data governance managers and Gen AI experts together are not even almost enough. I think in the particular case of Gen AI itself, you might need even people like from HR who are just diversity, equity, inclusion experts or ethical experts that can actually help, right? Defining together what is fair and isn't can be really difficult, and it's super subjective too. So the more you can actually find cross-functional consensus about it, the better. And that is, I always say, that is like the counterpart or the dark side of Gen AI, where to actually enable it, you need more human oversight. Like we all have seen the public failures, right? But you cannot do it without the human oversight right now. Like that's the contrast to doing more AI stuff that you actually need to oversight more. And that is just at the current state what needs to happen.
Yeah, I believe that going to the data quality side, even before you get to the ethics or bias perspective, the um, like what should I say? Not the I was gonna say quantity versus quality, but that also doesn't make sense. I'm
Yeah.
talking about like technical versus like non-technical quality side. But I'm talking
Yes.
about the context. When I'm talking about like whether the LLM actually understood the messages correctly and is
Correct.
giving a consistent quality result. I think it is
Mhm.
the other side of data quality that becomes a lot more important for Gen AI. And I think
Yes.
that one of the things that data governance teams can really help build is this evaluation framework for Gen AI
Yes.
models to run through. So you can check the scores and make sure that the basic or at least I mean, that eval framework should continue to evolve as there are more data or more inputs that gets added. But I feel like those are the areas that data governance team can really help. So then what
Yeah.
about using Gen AI for data governance? What are some of the
Yeah.
things that you see as like a huge opportunity as you've been doing this manually in the past or things that you feel like you're now starting to use day to day? I would love to hear more about those too.
Yeah. Absolutely. I do think that because what AI is good for today, without too many risks, is for just automating the more tedious and repeating tasks, right? This is what AI is really good for. And although you still need like a little bit of human judgment in the very end to make it better, for example, writing data governance policies, you could get started at least with Gen AI, right? Let it at least start writing for you all of the super important but still very manual task of just writing stuff down, and you can then just tweak it and refine it more with your own take, right? And the other way around is like profiling data. I would say is getting more and more better, right? So the usual case of identifying PII, right, like personal information, basically, And some of these tools are basically really good at that already, right? They identify phone numbers and email addresses, which is easier, but also just other relevant things like names or streets and addresses and all these things. And even if you had then still have to tweak it and sign it off, at least it helped you to not having to do it manually, right? To manually categorize all of these data types. And then I think lastly, it's also about workflows, I would say, right? So really change request is a often appearing topic in data governance. So we need to change the policy, or we need to change the data model, for example, behind a certain data product, for example. How do we go by it to do it on conceptual, logical, and physical level? And although the data models themselves have to be changed manually still, it requires some critical thinking. The whole request process itself can be a bit more automated, right? Like basically talking to a Teams chatbot, maybe like, can you please reach out to the right data domain owner of who I need to talk to about this change request, and ping that person, and ping, it just does it through the all the documentation that there is, and they just do it, for example. So there's one more of these cases I think coming, but it's really nice to be able to make it more efficient on these tasks and then focus more on the critical thinking.
Yep. That last use case actually is very interesting to me. When do data policies change? And how often does that happen? Can you tell us a little bit more about the real use cases of data policies that is beyond just defining it for the regulators and just to be compliant to the data privacy rules?
Yeah, I think there are policies that are more long-term and change very little, and some of them that change more frequently. I think the ones that are mostly stable is, for example, like a data classification policy, right? Like we define that certain data types always be classified as this, as an attribute, and we will be able to then make better decisions about different data types. And the data types themselves
considered as a personally identifiable data is
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Or what is financial data that shouldn't reach the public, or what is confidential research data that we have in the company, et cetera, right? So that classification itself shouldn't change too often. It's very rare that you actually change your whole business model, that you have new data types all of a sudden, but that is roughly it. Things that are changing more frequently, I would say, right, would be, for example, yeah, I would say like requirements ownership, and when you define for different data products, the different data product types, right? Like in this data mesh world, for example, you have like different data products, and you want to kind of ensure that they're being used for certain use cases, right? But over time, you might actually need to have new data product descriptions and new types, because not all of them are fitting into the same structure. So you start with a list maybe of 3 data product types, and you then add one more, and you add one more, et cetera, and you just kind of expand on that policy. So it's less about changing the previous, it's more about expanding on what is currently there, just to be more focused on the new status and the new world of having more in there. But that is one, for example, that is a bit more, I would say, frequently changed.
Got it. Yeah, very, very good. I feel like this, yeah, definitely gives me more richer understanding of how that could mean, because I feel like the policy definition is something that a lot of enterprises now do. It is almost like a requirement for, to get certified as, if you're ISO compliant, SOX compliant, SOC 2 compliant.
Right.
Now, the harder part, and this is also from my experience of going through a SOC 2 audit 4 years in a row, it's that implementation, showing that you have the evidences. Doesn't matter where it is, like you have to have more automation and something that tracks everything. Like every time somebody is getting a more privileged access on any of our applications, for those to be tracked and logged somewhere, I think that implementing all of those systems, I think has been a much larger uplift than defining the policies. So, but that's all. A lot of that is an implementation of policies. So, if policies also change, then it's like more issues, which means you need to have a more robust workflow engine.
Yeah, but I would say to that point, the policies change because of a business reason usually, right? They're like as long as they're tied to actually a business value, then they are valid changes.
Sure.
right? And I think at least people working in data governance are very conscious about basically the consequences of changing a policy, because they always know it's going to be a long a chain of events that's going to happen after changing it. So the usual tendency is say, let's not change it that soon. Maybe we
Right.
aggregate all of the needed changes, do it once per year, and that is also good enough, right?
Yeah.
But again, right, if the business requires like a strong change of direction, then it
Yeah.
just needs to be done,
Clarify
right? So
set of products. Yeah, for sure. Um, that very good. So I guess for Gen AI being applied, or data governance for Gen AI, or using Gen AI for data governance, anything particular that you see that you feel like is helpful more for the retail industry? When you have, many different locations that you're managing, and also many different source systems that are
mhm.
not always coming from SaaS solutions, could be like a POS solutions. And when there are a lot of complexity on the supply chain side too, what are the things that you feel like is the most uplift on regarding Gen AI and data governance as it's shifting more to be modernized than in the past?
Yes, I think, I mean, when we break down the challenges, the data challenges in the retail industry, the normal business model is that you are a retailer that is selling from a lot of manufacturers towards an end customer, right? And what that means is that on the one hand side, you have the end consumer as like one big important data set, right? Basically your master data, let's say, of managing customer data records, right? But you have the big other challenge on the other side, where when you sell products from many different manufacturers, you need to get the data in the right way in to make it work on your e-commerce or your whole retail selling system, right? And from my own experience, right, I know that different manufacturers and different wholesalers and retailers all use different data standards to transform that information and to
Mm,
basically uh, transfer that. So to standardize from, let's say, 100 manufacturers into the data format and structure that you need for your e-commerce to run, that requires a lot of transformation efforts. And I feel like that with at least with AI, right, there are some ways to do it a bit better, right? So you can at least start saying there's rule-based kind of I'd identify the rules of transformation while we're transforming the data and apply the same rules to new data coming in, learn from it, and then when we get the same data and the same structures in very different ways, have like an AI assisting way to actually do it better. So you save a lot of time on the manual transformation, for example. And on the other hand, I would say using then actually data to
Sorry, I have
target.
one question about the manual
Yeah,
transformation to more automated transformation. Are you
yeah.
talking about the aspect of that the program can determine what type of data was came in as like, and then transfer the format automatically based on what is being accepted by the destination?
No, I actually meant that the same information is transferred in different structures. So let's give an example. Let's say I'm a t-shirt retailer, right? And I get t-shirts from 5 different brands to sell. And brand A sends me t-shirt names in one column and color in one column, and then size in one column, right?
Uh-huh.
The other one gives me size in 10 different columns because that's how they do it, right? And the other one gives me colors in 5 different columns. And the other one gives me product names in 3 columns, right? Just for example, right? And that is the challenge that a retailer has. I have my own e-commerce system that is recording product data in a certain way, but I get it always in 5 different ways in. So how do I actually manage it? And that's what I mean with the whole transforming it and then using it actually in the way that I can use it to sell my products.
Got it. Then I think even like one is about the columns, but then the other part probably is also around the actual data values, to cleanse
True.
the data
Correct.
values or prep the data values so that it matches the, however I spell blue and you're spelling blue is the same. um,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, do you see that as an opportunity? Okay. Then do you then also see the role of MDMs to be really important? And do you feel like that is something that a lot of companies end up building in-house or even introducing a solution for?
Yes, I do think that MDM, in the bigger sense, is always still a challenge, and because exactly we don't have standards for everything in the world, right? So there's always going to be different standards for different companies in different contexts. So whenever it comes then to data sharing, either it's customers sharing data with organizations or organizations sharing product data with other organizations, there's always going to be that challenge to harmonize it all into like a streamlined data set into a master data, right? Um, but I would differentiate actually between operational purposes and analytical purposes.
Hmm.
Because what I just described is very operational, right? I
Yeah.
cannot run my business if I don't have the right product data in. But analytically, it might be a little bit different, right? So, but analytical means it doesn't have a direct business impact itself, right? It still has to be used by someone to make better decisions most of the time,
Sure.
right? Um, and that means you have a little bit more flexibility, right? You don't have to actually harmonize it all into one big master data management hub, but you can have like different data domains and different data products that are kind of segmenting down the master data into whatever is just needed for the different analytical purposes. And so there needs to be found a balance between that operational purpose, where it really needs to be all streamlined, otherwise I cannot run it. But for
Yeah.
analytical purposes, it might be a little bit more flexible.
Totally. Makes sense. Anything else on the retail side that did you want to share?
Uh, yeah, I would say, I mean, one interesting anecdote might be just like product names is a really big topic because retailers, let's say Foot Locker, they want to call the products that they're selling in a certain way, but manufacturers call their products differently, right? And when it comes to product names, you have some guardrails of like what you're not allowed to call it and so on, but you can do it as long as you want to, right? So you could start with like a brand name and a product type, and whatever you write afterwards is up to you to define how easy it is to sell it to your customer, right? So and
I didn't
so
know that was possible. I thought it was
yeah,
it has to carry the same product name as defined by the manufacturers.
not always, no. That is,
Hmm.
I mean, it comes down a little bit to branding and like also trademark legal things,
Okay.
etc. But I'm saying you can enrich it as much as you want, right? So like you can start with like whatever you need to do it, but then you add like um, uh, the best hiking shoe next to it or something, right? So right
Got it. Like
afterwards.
some slogan or yeah,
Exactly,
descriptor.
you enrich it. And I think that is a really interesting one because if you want to apply data governance on the free text field, everybody knows that that's horrible, right? And it's never easy to do that, but it's always the case for a retailer because they have the choice on how to name things. So yeah,
Got
just
it.
wanted to bring it up. Food for
Uh,
thought.
yeah, for sure. It just really gets into like I spend so much time on metadata. Whenever I hear more about the actual data values that can be
Yeah,
so dispersed from each other, I'm like, wow, that's a whole another can of worms that we can open. Yeah,
exactly.
so actually, let's talk a little bit now then more about EU regulations and
Hmm.
running data governance programs for maintaining the compliance. Actually, we do have a comment on our chat from May Win, who mentioned that in her experiences, the data policy really reflects the regulatory mandates. It doesn't really
Right.
change unless this is like really enforced. And so it's critical for the data governance teams to ensure that process with
Yeah.
audit and the rest of the business to make sure that
Hmm.
the changes are captured, which is very
Yeah.
important. So yeah, curious how like what your main general takeaways around implementing data governance for complying with regulations. Any
Yeah.
learnings or rule of thumbs that now you use whenever you are advising data governance officers on executing the rules and policies in their companies?
Yeah. I think there is, I usually talk about two layers of regulatory compliance. On the one hand side, you have the clear, specific compliance to a specific regulation. And the other one is how quickly and effectively you can actually turn a regulation into meeting them inside your organization. And what I'm saying by that is, right, on the one hand side, you have the legal text that any regulation has. and that gives you certain things that you need to work with, right? Um, but you cannot, every time there's a new legal text coming out, just panic around and kind of scramble and like say, what do we do now with our data? Oh, look, everything is now unclear. What are we supposed to do? So defining a process for that, I think, is really laying the right foundation. And again, as it usually often is with data governance, that requires cross-functional collaboration, because in the end, there are legal experts in any organization that are supposed to actually understand and be able to translate the legal text into business language, first of all, right? To then from business language turn it into data requirements. And to define that process, I call it the regulatory readiness process, right? To say, whenever we know legal text is coming and reaching a certain text, certain stage, in its finalization, we come together, we look at what it is, we define what the legal text means for us in the data requirement sense. Data governance defines a solution potentially on how that is met. Legal signs it off on what is actually, if that is something that from their point of view is meeting the legal requirements, then working together with information security or with audit or whoever the functions are that also are involved in there together to actually create that solution, then is a nice process, for example, right? And then you can define that actually independent of what regulations there are. You just need to have it basically together committed to that whenever there are regulations, we do always the same process and we get to a solution. Now, with the specific regulations, that's a different story. I mean, there are things like GDPR that happened a few years ago now, right? Where it actually already defines that you need to have somebody legally accountable as a data protection officer in your organization, right? And that kind of just defines it for you, where you say, okay, I just need to have one, and that person has to basically sign off and be aware of things and make sure that the organization is following the rules. And that makes it very clear. For other regulations, like let's say the EU Data Act or the EU AI Act, it's not completely finalized yet, right? And when it's something is not completely finalized yet, you're always in that uncertain stage where you feel like you know most of it, but what if something big changes in there towards the end and we did everything for nothing? So you kind of end up in that limbo stage of having tried going towards it, but not being sure that you did the right thing yet, which just means you have to deal with a lot of uncertainty in data governance as well. So, and the only solution to that is just to basically face the uncertainty. And I would say getting used to it, right? The only way to face uncertainty is to be ready to face the change when it happens. Like at least you can say, if the other thing comes that I didn't expect, at least we know how to quickly react to it. And that's the best you can do also in data governance.
Yep. Yeah, very true. So, just for those who are starting to build up their data governance foundation, I'm curious if there are things that you feel like is a blind spot for a lot of companies. Some of the things that we see a lot that happens in many companies that we work with, they will start first classifying all the PII data. They will put a certain changes like row-based access control, column-based access control, masking those data, and then putting that access process that you may have to go through for getting access to any of the privileged data. Um, and then there may be also the audit reporting that can run regularly to understand who has access to which privileged data and for what purpose, which where data retention can come from. Yeah, I guess data retention is a whole another thing, depending on when it was collected and, how it was used and so on and so forth. And also thinking about this, if this was a classified data, like, are we storing it in an aggregated form or do we have to really purge it completely? I'm wondering, like, maybe one of these are some of the things that you feel like people like may see it as you see it as a blind spot, because in a way I feel like if we were to say, oh, like we need to just like collaborate with legal and then make sure that all of those are covered, from a person who's always on the side of building products, what I generally want to understand would be, what are the main foundational components that I need to have so that I can change things more in agile. But if I have a good foundation of
Right.
managing where all the private data are, understanding how they've been accessed inside the company, and if I can start putting workflows or reporting on top of that, I can kind of like modify or add different rules on top. I'm wondering if there are certain, like, either these types of essential components that you feel like is important to have, but not many people may recognize, or things that may happen during the execution side that you might have had to rewire or rebuild some parts of the governance program.
Right. That's a great question. I would say that whole what you're saying about more of a product thinking as well, right? That is definitely what I can relate to. And maybe I actually tackle that question from a different angle. The way to treat it more as a agile approach, let's say, and to be more iterative, is to not try to do everything at once, right? You can plan out all of your data governance ahead, right? But you need to just go with the flow. And that has another component to it. Like, nobody who invests in data governance will give you 2 years until you prove value, right? So they want to see something a little earlier than that. So you cannot just say in 2 years I will have all of the data classified and all documented, and I will have data owners for everyone, and then we finally have data governance. That's just not going to work. So the alternative is to actually do it use case based, is what I would say, right? To say, let's first tackle on where data governance is most needed, have business cases to it, right? Either there could be a regulation that we are facing soon and we see a serious risk with it. Okay, fine. That might be one use case. Another one might be like a super strong data quality use case too, right? Where like tens of people are cleaning up data every week and we just cannot handle it anymore. Let's fix it at the root cause and handle this in the right way. But doing it use case by use case means you do everything you just said, like classifying data, documenting right, assigning ownership, putting monitoring on top, right? Having a remediation process, or being audited by it, but in a much smaller time period, right? So instead of just waiting until you have done it for everything, you do it in a use case and you try to do it in a few months and not in a year or 2 years, to then showcase that you can actually do it and it generates value, right?
Well, when you say a use case, but if it's a use case for the whole company, that still probably will take years. So, like, how would it be for like a domain perspective? But like, do you feel like there are like a kind of a clear cut of the domain to restrict the amount of data that you might have to dive into?
I would argue there's no use case that will need all of the data of the company, right? That is probably not likely. But there will be use cases that might need bigger amounts of data. But then you have that whole approach of saying, what is the most critical part of it, right? I mean, everybody, if we ask for what data is important, you're going to say everything. All the data is important. But if we really zoom in on the critical data elements, we call it, right? The CDEs, so to say which ones are the real ones that really, without them, if we move them away, then everything would break down. Then you would have those ones.
Got it. You said
even
CD. What would that stand for?
Critical data elements is for. Yeah, exactly. So zooming in on those helps you at least to identify and prioritize, and that also makes it tangible again, right? You have use cases based on smaller data objects rather than all of the data objects. So yeah, I mean, this is what I'm saying. And the other way around is, even if it's like all the data, then you still break it down into smaller chunks to deal with it one after another. You just cannot do it all at once.
For sure. So actually, let's dive into that a little bit. How would you define a CDE? What should be part of the CDE?
Yeah, I mean, I would say from my point of view, there's probably many theories out there also about how to do it, but I always tie it to business value first, right? So again, from if we are saying that because of data issues, we are not generating as much value as we can, then let's talk about where the value depends on and what data objects it really depends the value from, right? And if we talk about then, for example, customers being one of the data objects, then let's talk about if we really say that all of the attributes are really needed or not, right? Like, if we are saying that we need to be better at customer segmentation, what are the actual attributes that we need for it? And do we really need all of them? not all of them have to be CDEs, right? Some of them are just not CDEs, and some of them are. And this way, we just kind of do it this way. Um, so it's really, I would tie it to first of all business value, right? But then you also have the lens of sensitivity and kind of risk, avoiding risk and like protection, et cetera, et cetera, where you have to guard it no matter what, and that it's less about generating new value, but actually protecting yourself from risk, right? That is, I would say, the other layer of defining these critical data elements as well. And then lastly, I would say that comes over time, the more use cases you do, which is you all of a sudden realize that many use cases all go back to the same elements, and you have not classified that as a critical data element before. But the more you see that a lot of use cases actually do need it in the end, then you might need to actually recognize it as one, because it's just depending and a foundation for so many other use cases.
So it sounds like data governance teams needs to be very much aware of all the data. Like like if I have like thousands of data sets, what these are used for, like who's
Mhm.
using them, what are kind of like the, relevant for which use cases. What are the ways that you recommend or for data governance officers to do that? Is it more or less just having enough interactions with the stakeholders and different businesses because so that they understand the use cases better? Yeah,
Yeah.
are there things that you would do or recommend others to do in that regards?
Yeah, I think the very first step is, of course, just good documentation, right? I mean, a lot of
Mm,
things when it comes to transparency is by having a data catalog in place, for example, right? It's really just at least I can go somewhere and read up on what I don't know and know what is happening to the data in your organization, right? So that is just a good starting point. But the other part of it is, I wouldn't actually agree that data governance needs to know what's happening to all of the data all the time. That should
mm,
actually sit with the data owners, right? I
mm.
see the data governance people more as helping to establish the right processes and kind of authorities and kind of templates, if you will, before running data governance in the right way. But executing it and knowing the actual business value behind it happens to be with the data owners that should have more understanding of it.
Got it. So would you say the job of defining CDE is actually on the data owners, not the data governance
Yes,
officers?
data owners responsible, but data governance facilitating, I would say, or
Right,
enabling.
right. That makes sense. Yeah, because of a lot of things that we do as Alexa, it's like really uncovering how your data is currently being utilized inside the company. So this really resonates with me as you say that. Um, Moving into more of the data governance and just like the chief data officer side, we do have a question from May again.
Mhm.
Are you seeing companies being proactive in having a chief data officer? How would you articulate the business case of having a CDO? I think this is actually a question that is coming up more, and also for existing CDOs to answer to continue expanding their role and be more business oriented in the company.
Yeah, uh, absolutely. I would say there are actually two scenarios in this. One is that they call it publicly a chief data officer, but it's just like a renamed head of data or like a team lead after all, just right. Because the C level basically recognition of it should indicate that they have a more decision making and influential power, but many times they don't. So it's still like a chief data
Mhm.
officer reporting maybe to another C level or even a VP or something, and that is not good, right? But if
Right.
you want to do it right, and there are companies that are doing it right, then you actually do have a C-level person that is responsible for data, which is for me usually the ultimate indicator to have finally treated data as an asset, right? To really finally recognize that data is one of the most important resources to have for a company, and to really make strategically the right choices on C-level and treating it equally as the other functions that you have that require that type of leadership. Um, I mean, the business case around it, it's I think a tricky question. For me, it also often comes down to the chicken or egg, right? So first, you need to convince leadership that data is an important asset to then finally recognize that we need a chief data officer, or the chief data officer comes in and needs to prove why data is important, which also happens very often. And if that doesn't happen, then they leave. And we know that many chief data officers don't stay longer than a year, right? And we have seen, I think, all of the statistics. So I don't think the world is fully ready yet for chief data officers. It's very much a fluctuative kind of job title that can mean many things right now in different contexts. But at least we're trying to go in the right direction for it.
Yep. No, I'm with you. I have thoughts on this too.
Mhm.
I feel like everyone and all executives do agree that they want to leverage data. They believe and they agree that data is important and they want to make a better, or they will be able to make better business decisions if they had all the data. This is why everyone collects so much data, right?
Right.
The part and the irony about chief data officers and data teams is that many times when these infrastructure get built to collect, process, and store and analyze data, data teams end up becoming more like an IT team. They are processing tickets, they are churning out dashboards as the businesses ask, rather than the data team proactively driving analysis and suggestions to the business. And I feel like that is the part that a lot of data teams needs to migrate to, and how CDOs needs to lead, because that's really truly the part of being a partners in business, rather than a, I don't want to call it just the cost center, but more like on the IT side on operating the business. And I think there are a lot of changes and updates coming up for a lot of industry leaders pushing for this change. And so, but I think it is going to take some time, because many times in the past, traditionally, I think data teams been operating as more like a part of the tech or IT team.
That is very true. Absolutely. Yeah.
So I guess with that, what are the top 3 things that you would do if you were to go back to being a data governance officer today? You've done all the work at Adidas, and now you're seeing many different clients areas. I'm sure you have a lot of things that you feel like you would do like 10x better now. So
Yes, I would say so. I mean, I already kind of related to that before, but to say start small but think big is what I would say, right? Like, don't try to solve everything at once, but start smaller, but have the big picture in mind, and just try to tackle step by step. Otherwise, it can be very overwhelming, and it will be very overwhelming if you try to have too big of a scope at the beginning. The second thing is to, I think, never underestimate the importance of collaboration, right? Like, it does feel like that data governance still is having that perception to be more of the police function, or like the people who just write rules and sit back and wait until everyone complies. But that should not happen anymore. So we need to just make a lot more proactive efforts to change that and go to people and actually have good conversations, right? And just tell people that data governance is here to help and it's to enable things. It's not here to be the police for everything. And I think the third thing is probably about, I would say, be less dogmatic and more practical. I would almost call it. Like, so if you read into data governance books, there's a lot of things that you can do and that you should do. But data governance is not a one size fits all approach, right? And if your company really doesn't like policies, then don't try to force a bunch of policies on it, and try to do it in a different way, maybe, right? It's like, maybe just embed it more as rules and other documents. But if your policy always takes like 3 months to be signed off and it just doesn't work because your company doesn't like to deal with it, then you have to find other ways to do it. So learn from best practices, but apply it and be willing to be flexible for your own organization.
right. In a way, I do see more central, teams like data governance teams that run center of excellence be more collaborative and are, really trying to do the right thing for everyone.
Yeah.
But they don't always get the same sentiment or I guess the similar commitment or work back from the data owners in different businesses. Do you
Right.
have any tips or tricks on making sure that everyone is doing their share, and so that other business domain holders don't necessarily feel like they've done everything, but then it's not like happening really on the other side?
That's a good question. I think it's both a matter of communicating clearly your own contribution as well as acknowledging other people's contributions, right? Many
Hmm.
of these, I think, conflicts come from this attitude of, I don't know what the hell they're doing the whole day, and I've been doing so much for it. This is not fair, right? Right? This is basically like in a very like extreme sense about what's happening. So the key to is that everybody should communicate more what they're doing, because that's the first transparency problem. And the other one is acknowledge each other, that I recognize what you're doing and that we're working actually together on the same thing. And again, that requires communication. Data governance is so much back end work, it sounds like, that if you don't communicate it, it will stay invisible, very simply put, right? Like if you don't
Sure.
communicate that you have a new policy, it's just going to sit somewhere on a shared drive and nobody will ever open it, right? Simply said. So it needs to happen. There needs to be communication and more transparency with everyone.
Okay. So lots of things to do. What are some of the things that you won't do, or you won't let your teams do, or have them to stop doing if you're a new head of data?
Um, I would say, normally, I would say just don't say yes to everything. And that goes back actually to your point, right? That data, if you don't pay attention, quickly becomes a service function and just like a service center for every data things. But not
Yeah.
everything should be taken care of a data team, right? So, um, setting boundaries really early on, and rather say, okay, even if I don't know exactly what we're going to do, but we're not going to take all of the requests and just start doing stuff, because sooner or later you're going to end up working on tickets all the time and not have time to think anymore what you're supposed to do, right? You're just doing things all the time. So really being clear from the beginning to set the boundaries of, let's find out what our objective is, what our way of working is, and who's doing what, and then we start tackling the right things. How much are we enabling, how much are we doing ourselves, and how much do we need to build on as new capabilities to really work towards what we want to do. So kind of just work on that. Don't never like just start doing, but first have like a little bit more of a break of thinking through it. That I would say.
Do you feel like that applies to the data governance teams as well?
And not too much, because usually people don't know what data governance is supposed to do. They don't know even what to ask from data governance when they start. Right? That's usually, it's actually the other way around. Yeah, actually, it's for data governance the other way around. Data governance, when they start, they should start networking with everyone to make sure that everybody understands what they're here for, because they're not getting any proactive requests probably otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, for sure. Wow, amazing. I can't believe like we actually went through all the questions that I prepared. I'm actually curious on this like last question. You've been very active on LinkedIn, and I guess data community in general. I saw
Mhm.
that you are also running Dama Germany chapter, and also I think I've seen you act very active at the I think DQ community, like a
Yep.
Slack
Yep.
community in the past. Yeah. So that means that you are interacting with other data governance officers, people that are
Right.
involved in data quality, data governance a lot. I'm sure you are aware of a lot of the new technologies and tooling coming out in the market. What are some of the things that you are most excited about that you've seen recently in the data ecosystem?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that might be my own bias, but I really am seeing great advances in the data catalog market for sure. I think that overall, like, I mean, I'm talking to you as well about it, of course, right? But generally, I feel like this whole trend from moving from just having been a simple metadata tool to be really a tool of collaboration, finally, right? is really taking off. And I really enjoy that because that makes the job of data governance much easier to have a platform to work with, right? And not to just keep everything in your own kind of collaboration way, but to have also a tool that enables that collaboration is really cool. Um, I think other than that, right? I mean, data quality tools wise, I think is also a lot of smaller players popping up that are doing really niche but really good things. And the whole area of profiling data smarter than before, but also suggesting corrections of data more proactively
Mm.
by being smart about it. That is really cool trend. I don't think it's like 100% there yet to actually be fully ready autonomously, but it's going definitely in the right direction. So I think those two are the real good things that I look forward to.
For sure. Very exciting. Then do you have any predictions of how data governance teams will operate, as or the types of things that you feel like you will see in the next 5 years with all the advancement that's happening in technology today?
Yeah. I think that as an ops model, federated governance is definitely going to become the new default. It was only one of the ways of doing governance in the past, right? You still had like centralized governance as well for warehouses, et cetera, et cetera. But because the new world is definitely going for more decentralized approaches, either
Mm-hmm.
data mesh or in data fabric or whatever, um, everybody realizes you need actually more of the decentralized expert point of view and involvement on data and not do it all centrally in one team anymore. So moving that to more data owners and more data governance as a service or facilitator overall, that's definitely, I think, becoming the direction.
So
And the
I guess
yeah,
just to explain, when you say federated data governance, are you recalling to a concept where there is no centralized governing body as like team, and each domain and data teams operate independently, or are you actually talking about more of the hub and spoke approach that is more like a hybrid?
definitely the not hub and spoke one. So really, more
Oh,
autonomous
so
domain.
more the former, like.
Exactly, exactly. But with the, of course, added point that there will be cross-functional alignments needed, right? So it's not like completely autonomous.
Mhm.
And you need to have that kind of, you can call it committees or boards or whatever you want to call it, right? But I think those cross-functional decisions have to still be made, and you need to facilitate that. But the much smaller central data governance team that will still remain is more of a facilitator and more of a center of excellence, right? Rather, and then
Got
not
it.
actually.
So do you feel like that center of excellence and more centralized, quote unquote, currently governing body will become more like a system or infrastructure that you rely on? Like,
No,
how
I
would
don't
that
wouldn't call
actually
this.
get? Because in a way, if it's like fully decentralized, then like you may lose the, I guess the like a line of a shared understanding or shared communication. It will be just only like one to another, like one to one instead of like one to many is going to be harder.
True, true. Um, yeah, I mean, but I would say that we can work on it now, right? To have that cross-functional alignment that it's needed, because my theory is that if they don't do the cross-functional alignment from the start, then everybody will face the consequences anyway, right? So people will notice very soon that things are not working anymore because they make decisions that are conflicting with each other. So that the need is there for a cross-functional collaboration will always be very soon recognized by
Right.
everyone, right?
And so
And
then why
you need
not
to.
hub and spoke? Yeah, why more decentralized? Where do you see the biggest advantage and the reason that it will be more decentralized?
Yeah, I think though that at least from what I've now seen, that different business units or functions, right? They have some overlap of things, but they also have very distinctly their own things they need to deal with that the other functions or business units don't have to deal with. And that I think will become more. It's just like I cannot
Hmm.
really prove it like with facts, but it feels like that if you don't give them the autonomy to deal with their own things in their own way, this way, then you will just lose speed and you will not be as fast as the industry might need you to be. So, uh,
Yeah.
It's probably just a more personal preference at this point in time for me, right? Because I see that it's slowing down companies. The more they still try to do hub and spoke, and they realize that we cannot wait to do hub and spoke all the time. But yeah, for at this point in time, I feel like it's going more in the direction to be even more autonomous.
Yeah, and I think this is why data mesh is such a huge kind of like a concept, like a very
Exactly.
groundbreaking concept for a lot of companies to see it that way. Um,
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, Tiankai, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really awesome to talk to you. I'm so glad that we made this happen finally. And those of you who are still listening, if you haven't already, go follow Tiankai, connect with him. Like he really posts amazing content on LinkedIn, and it's been always a joy for me to see his posts on my social feed. So, yeah, thank you again, Tiankai, and I wish you have a great weekend.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for having me, and have a good weekend too.
All right. Thanks.